From Anshe Sfard Beth El Emeth Congregation, it's time to take 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of how to kosherize or how to kosher a kitchen. In order to understand the idea of kosherizing, we need to understand two basic principles. One is kibol o kach polto. The way that the non-kosher got into the product, got into the fork, got into the spoon, got into the pot, got into the surface of the counter, got into the burners, got into the pot, that's how we're going to get all of these elements out of the fork, the spoon, the knife, the surface, the pot, the burners, the stove. In other words, let's say you have a frying pan and you used heat to make it non-kosher. Let's say it was milchik, you wanted it to be fleishik, which you can only do once in a lifetime, but it was not kosher, you want to make it kosher. You got mixed up between the milchiks and the fleishiks, and you want to make it milchik again. So it became not kosher because you put it on the frying pan, you put it on the fire. Arguably, since it was used for fire, you have to kosherize it by using fire. Something was boiled in a pot, then it became not kosher. You mixed the milk and the meat, or it wasn't a kosher pot. So it became not kosher through boiling, through water. So then we have to boil it to make it kosher. With a knife, there was a certain amount of abrasion that took place as you were cutting your non-kosher hot food. You were slicing the meat, and it was not kosher. And you sliced it, and you pushed it down. So we need to use some abrasion to get the non-kosher out of here as well. The second thing is the idea of no sein tam lifgam, that after 24 hours, we consider that the food doesn't taste good anymore. So not only are we getting it out the way it went in to the item, but also it's no sein tam lifgam. We want to get it to a point where it doesn't taste good anymore. It's 24 hours old. In other words, if you had a donut and you left it out on the table all night, it would be pretty putrid by the next day. Even more so if something was inside a pot. There was a little bit of flavor inside a pot, a little bit non-kosher flavor. By the next day, that flavor would be gone. It would be all dried up, and it would give a bad flavor. It would be spoiled. It would spoil the pot. It's not going to make it more flavorful, more enjoyable. It's going to make it less flavorful, and therefore, no sein tam lifgam. Something gives a bad flavor, it's permitted. So we're going to put these two combinations together. We're also going to have so much water that's boiling. It's going to overwhelm the amount of not kosher that's in that pot or that's in that spoon, whatever it is. So let's get started. The first thing we need to know, that in order to kosherize, we need to have really boiling water. So let's take a look at that pot. Make sure it's really boiling. If you know the process of boiling, first there are little bubbles. It's like small, little tiny bubbles in the water. Then when there are large bubbles, now you're ready to kosher. Let's take a look. Oh yeah, large, big bubbles. They're going. Now after you leave the pot open for a while, the bubbles will calm down. So you want to kind of keep it going. I have it on a high flame. If you get frustrated, you want to fill up a whole pot and it takes a while to boil. Don't forget, just a friendly advice, if you cover the pot, it'll boil more quickly. Now before we kosherize, you got to make sure that in the last 24 hours, you haven't used that pot, that spoon, that stove, that oven, that surface, that knife, that fork. If you haven't used it in 24 hours, and the kosherizing pot hasn't been used in 24 hours, then you're okay. Now, let's say by mistake your fleishik pot had some milk in it, and now you want to kosherize it. So what do you use? What pot do you use? You want it to become milchik, but it's a little bit fleishik. It's okay. As long as the pot hasn't been used for 24 hours, we can use milchik pot, fleishik pot. It doesn't make a difference. Usually if you're going to kosherize something, if you're milchik, you use a milchik pot. But But fundamentally, as long as the spoon hasn't been used in 24 hours and the pot hasn't been used in 24 hours, you can use any kind of pot. As long as it's 24 hours dormant, cold for 24 hours, you're okay. The surface that you're going to kosherize, the oven, the stove also should be cold for 24 hours beforehand. So let's get started. First of all, we want to kosherize this knife. So there's a lot of different questions about a knife. First question is the meeting point between the blade and the handle. Is there any dirt in there? Is there any residue? Very often there is. If we don't do a good job of cleaning, using steel wool and all that, sometimes there could be something in there. If it's really very putrid, you may not be able to kosherize your knife altogether. If you use some steel wool, usually you can get out that residue that's there. Second thing is, the Talmud recommends that you take the knife and stab it into the ground 10 times. My teachers taught me that it's also okay to take a steel wool, this is sort of a steel wool, and to rub it really hard 10 times to make sure that any of the serrated edges will be kosherized. Now, some knives have a serrated edge, and they too could develop residue, and that could become a problem. If you have a silverware, actual silver, and there's a little bit of residue there, you're not going to use steel wool on silverware, so you may not be able to kosherize the item altogether. So we have two possibilities. One is to take hard dirt and stab it in 10 times. The first few times, the dirt is fine, but then it becomes softer. You have to find some different dirt. Or you can use steel wool and try to do that 10 times with the steel wool. A fork is also complicated because a fork also will have some residue perhaps in the various grooves. This fork is very nice and clean, but we have to look and see if there's a problem. If there is, we have to use some steel wool and get out those problems on the inside. If you can't get it out, you can't kosherize it. All right. Now, don't forget about safety. Firstly, there could be some water flying around. You don't want to have children around. You want to wear shoes because the water might fall on the floor and the very hot water could scald your feet, God forbid. If a woman is wearing a dress, so watch out. You don't want the legs to be scalded with the hot water. Furthermore, be sure to use these types of gloves so that you won't burn your fingers either. Even a pot top could be very, very hot. Now, here there are two different methods. We could just throw all the silver, say you have a lot of silverware, you're going kosher, you weren't kosher before, now you're going kosher, you have 100 pieces of silverware. So some people will put them in the pot, but you don't want to put it there too long. If you put all the silverware in the pot for a long time, the non-kosher will come out of this fork, but then it will come out, it might go back in. So I was taught that it's better to just briefly stick the fork into the pot. Others may have other ideas. You can see the crcweb.org for their kosherizing video as well. So I think I better put on two mitts, thermal mitts, and we'll get started. Now there's also an idea that comes from kochim, comes from sacrifices, that Morak B'Shutaf Hamayim mentions in the Torah, we read it before Pesach, that you should also put it in water. So we have a custom that even though it may not be absolutely necessary, we put it in water afterwards. So after we put the hot water, we put the cold water. And sort of the hot-cold has an effect and an impact as well. So here we go. We're going to stick the fork in there. I didn't fill the water all the way up because it's hard to get a lot of water boiling. I filled it just enough that half the fork will get wet. Then I'll turn it over, put the other half in. I also don't want to immerse it completely because then I won't be able to get it. And then it'll go in there, it'll stay. I won't be able to get it out. I'll have to find tongues to get it out. It'll be complicated. So I'm going to do it half and half. Half in, turn it upside down, the other half in, quickly put it under water. Let's go. Here we go. There's the bubbling, it's bubbling nice and good. I put it in here. I lean it so I can get half of it in. Then I have my gloves on so I can touch the other half. It's very hot. Put the other half in. See that? Put that in there. Bubbling. And now I quickly have to go wash that fork off. Turn on that water. Cold water. Done. Now we got to do the knife. We put the knife in the hot water, then the other side, and now go wash it again. Good. Now, let's say I had with a fork it would be much less complicated. You stick it in, ooh, there it goes. And you'd want to get that out as well. Now, some people, in order to keep the water hot, will actually put a hot item in there. A hot brick, put the brick in the oven, take a hot rock. Be careful, you have to have tongs or something, put the rock in the water. It keeps the water nice and hot as it's going, as that spoon's doing a good job in there too. Let's say I wanted to kosherize another pot. So first you have to make sure the pot is absolutely clean. Hopefully it is. And then you can stick the pot in as well. Again, put it in the cold water after that. The handle is not necessary to kosherize. What about the big pot itself? So, a good way to do it is, you boil up a pot of water, small pot. Then you boil up a big pot. Then, how do we make the large pot overflow like it would when you're cooking? Well, you get it to the top, take the other hot pot, stick it in there and make it overflow. And with that, you're all set. Then, what about the stove? What about the stovetop? How do we kosherize the stovetop? So the truth is that you want to get the burners as clean as you can, and then if you simply turn the stove on high, those flames themselves will kosherize those burners. Now, if you have an electric coil, it's very easy to see when it turns red hot. When it turns red hot, it's kosherized. I'll leave it for 15 minutes, also a good idea. But certainly when it's red hot, it's kosher. With these, usually about a half an hour, a good amount of time. Usually most cooking is about a half an hour, so too this will be a half an hour. What about the oven itself? Well, you want to make sure those grids are nice and clean. Very difficult, very challenging. You have to use a steel wool. You want to take easy off and put it on, try to get off everything. Now, sometimes things are stained. There's a brown stain. It doesn't come off. As long as you don't feel it with your fingers, it could be okay. And then you turn the oven on to the highest setting. It's broil 500, and turn it on for about a half an hour on broil, for an hour on 500, and surely you never used it for more than a full hour on 500 or half an hour on broil. That's about what the highest you would usually use it. So that would kosherize the inside. Even better if you have a self-cleaning oven, then it goes on to a very high temperature, burns everything off, and you're in great shape. So self-cleaning oven is always a great way to kosherize things, but make sure you, again, don't use that oven 24 hours beforehand. To kosherize the sink, you have the very hot water boiling to the highest boil, and then you pour the water all around, including all the side surfaces, and make sure that all the side surfaces are kosherized as well. Then, same procedure, turn on the cold water to rinse it off afterwards. What about a surface? How do we kosherize a surface? So we get our mittens, and just to demonstrate a bit, take the water and we pour it on the surface. There it goes, all over the surface. And then, after that, I want to pour some cold water on that surface. Again, hot and then cold as well. Some people say that if you can, the question is, doesn't the water on the surface, doesn't that water become cold? So some people suggest that after you pour the hot water, you then take an iron. You have to be careful about the electronics of this, make sure you don't get electrocuted. But you take an iron and you iron the surface as well. That way you have both sort of a hot rock and a surface. If you can use a hot brick without scratching the surface, you can do that, and you're good. Can all materials be kosherized? Well, there's a debate about that. My teacher, Rabbi Tendler, he said that yes, plastic could be kosherized. It's only Torah idal kli cheresh, Torah says about pottery that it can never be cleansed of its impurities. The non-kosher can never come out of the walls of the pottery. You have to destroy the pottery. You can't kosherize pottery. But plastic could be kosherized. On that basis, can you kosherize a dishwasher? Many different opinions. Moshe Feinstein was very strict about it and basically said no. But Rabbi Baruch Simon and others Rabbi Body has been more lenient. If you run it 3 times, would be permitted. Speak to your local posek for his particular opinion. What about China? So here we go to a different principle. The Gemara mentions regarding the vessels that hold wine, that after Yud Beis Chodesh, after a whole full year, 12 months, then it's so old that the taste is gone. Does that apply to kosher as well? It's a matter of debate. My teachers taught me that the following, that if you have a great financial need, let's say you're a person of modest means and your grandmother, who wasn't most kosher, a kitchen, she left you a set of dishes. And this set of dishes is very valuable, and you really need it. So then you leave it in a box, put a date on it, 12 months later, you can use that. Some insist on also putting the dishes in water. Speak to your local rabbi about that, in the hot water, and you're all set. But if you have your brother wants to lend you in your dormitory, wants to lend you a dish, and you want to kosherize a dish, generally we don't kosherize dishes. They're considered pottery, which, as the Talmud says, doesn't come out of its walls for all the years. The question of putting in something in the mikveh is a different topic. Maybe we'll have another video about that. Different topic. That's a matter of when you buy an item, especially glass and metal, from a Gentile, you have to put them in the mikveh. What about glazed items? You do that without a blessing, or some say don't do it at all. But that's a separate question. Putting something in mikveh, that's in terms of impurities, different law of tevilas kelim, of the dunking of vessels you get from a Gentile. If a Jew makes it, you don't have to do it. And this is a matter of physically removing the non-kosher from the item, and that's what we talked about today. So that's a little bit about kosherizing. Speak to your local Orthodox rabbi to come over your house and help you do it. There is one question about the frying pan we began with. Some say frying pan became non-kosher through fire. Some say since there's so much oil, it's really considered to be boiled with water, so you could just boil it. So it's best if you could use a Bunsen burner, something like that, to kosherize the frying pan. Thank you for joining us here at the Anshe Sfard Beth Lameth congregation. Join us each week for a discussion of the Parsha and the various holidays. And thanks to Jason Lefkowitz, our producer. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein. To learn more, visit ASBEE.org.